What's up, everyone? It's Q Grows, and we are live right now on CannaBuzz. It's a very special show today. We are super stoked to have Jeremy from BuildASoil. We're gonna get all into all kinds of stuff growing outside because it's springtime right now. We're getting ready for summer, so we want to help you get ready to grow in all kinds of different scenarios. We'll ask a couple other questions about BuildASoil and the stuff that he's got going on over there. There's all kinds of cool products that they have going out there. So we want to talk about all sorts of different things. But before we get into it, I got a couple shout outs that I need to get into. First off, shout out to everyone in the CannaBuzz community. Without your support, we wouldn't be here. So thank you. Thank you so much. I've been looking at our supporter numbers and they're the highest they've ever been. So thank you so much for coming in and supporting us every month. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to do things like giveaway our giveaways every show that we're doing. Like this show today, we're going to be giving away this pack of TikiMadMan seeds. This is Detroit Runts by Tropical Runts. It's a 10 pack, and there's some stickers in here thanks to our friend over at TikiMadMan. So thank you to our supporters. Use code New Year at checkout, and you'll get half off your first month. And then we also need to give a shout out to TikiMadMan. JR, we had a promo. First off, I know TikiSeeds.com has a big secret drop or update coming up on March 31st, right? So people should stay tuned for that.
Yes, he's got, he won't tell us. It's a drop that's coming at the end of the month. And so we're trying to get people out there, make them aware. Check out Tiki's IG. And TikiSeeds.com. Also on the King Kong clone site, they're doing a buy one, get one free, which is a good opportunity to snag some genetics because you can get one and build an army. So get out there and try to check out what Tiki has to offer at the King Kong clones.
Awesome. Well, speaking of building an army, this man over here, Jeremy, BuildASoil, he's been building an army with all kinds of knowledge that he's been dropping over the past few years. So we are super stoked to have him today. He's there's so much behind him. He's got his business at buildasoil.com. If you're not familiar, it's an amazing store where you can get all kinds of different nutrients and soil and IPM stuff, anything you could want and need. It's just been amazing to see his store really take off over the last handful of years. And then he also has an absolutely amazing YouTube channel. It's up over 100,000 subscribers, I think, right? It's just been kicking ass, and it's just an amazing amount of information. So make sure to check out the BuildASoil YouTube page. But Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really stoked to have you.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. This is great. It's not often that I get to do this on the weekend, and really just to kick it and talk soil is one of my favorite things to do. So appreciate it, man.
Sweet.
Let's do it.
Yeah, everyone in the chat and on the comments on YouTube, give this man some love for hanging out with us on a Sunday. We certainly appreciate it. Well, so JR, we like to, and Jeremy, we like to kick off this show with getting to know you a little bit. So Jeremy, can you walk us through a bit of your background? Why are you such a fan of the good herb? And then how did that lead into BuildASoil? Just help give our listeners a little bit of a background on you.
All right. So I'll do my best, man. It's been a while since I've even thought about that. This plant has been such a part of my life. I don't think I've missed a day in 20 years or something. It's kind of crazy. And I never really thought it would be like that at all. In high school, didn't really party. College, found the plant through a roommate, and it just became a pretty regular part of my life. My brain's pretty active, and it just kind of connected with me pretty quickly. As soon as I found out, I was like, oh, this is it? You mean it's just mellow? Like, I thought people were going to get high, So after that, it just became a regular routine. And eventually, obviously, it can be expensive, right? And so started going to the dispensary when it became legal in California. And I mean, literally, it was like you'd go upstairs on a second level of some shopping center, and there'd be like 7 dispensaries in a row, and they'd all just be advertising like what they got dropped that day. And it was fun, but you start wondering, like, how do they grow this? Where does it come from? Some kid with a backpack would just like show up, go into the back real quick, and then skate out. And it wasn't until I moved to Colorado that I dabbled a little bit in growing. But when I moved to Colorado, I didn't know anybody. And I was in a small town. There was no real dispensary scene at all. And I just wanted to start growing. And so a million questions started to come, like anybody that learns to grow. It's like, you want results. It takes a long time. like between now and a bag of herb. It's a while if you just get the idea.
Yeah.
And so I was like, man, how do I get this now? Like as fast as possible, because I just don't have a guy. And I'd never seen brick before. And I was getting like brick. I was like, this is terrible. I'm not used to this in California, like on the beach. And so it was just, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so starting to grow for me, it just became a passion. It was at a time in my life I broke up with a relationship, was in a new place. Everything was upside down. And I was able to just spend time like doing something that made me happy. And I'd never thought I'd be a gardener or anything like that, but it just took on a life of its own. It took over my life in ways that I never anticipated. I started growing food. I started growing houseplants. I started looking forward to like what's going to show on the leaf the next day. You know, what's it going to smell like? And after you go through your first harvest and you connect to that feeling where you finally get to understand, like, that's how the bud gets in the jar. Like, it's for me, it just the switch never turned off. Like, it's been 24/7, 365. I've had to grow since then.
Yeah.
That's how it started. I mean, the business was kind of a separate thing, just kind of a natural extension of it. But that's the story of herb for me.
I got a question for you that on that point that I just kind of came to mind is, what do you think it is about you that kind of separates your pursuit of knowledge between, like, you know, one of the things that we really struggle with in the grower community is bro science. And I think one of the best things about you and your contribution to the community is you're just interested in the truth. You know what I mean? And you're not like biased towards like, oh, this is the old way of doing things. You certainly take that as input, right? But it's all towards the pursuit of truth. So just curious, like, what do you think is about you that makes you, because that's a huge contribution that you bring to the community.
Well, I appreciate that. And I mean, I'm not perfect at all, right? I'm still following this path and I try and pursue knowledge that makes sense. It's duplicatable. And I'm not a scientist or anything. I'm just doing this. And my brain naturally, for whatever reason, when I was young, there was a couple of things I can maybe relate back to, but like my grandparents got me this human calculator book on tape. I didn't know humans could do math in their brain like that, like those guys that do the magic tricks. And then they would break it down for you. How you do this is different than what they teach you in school. And I was like, oh, so he's not doing it the long way and memorizing, carrying the zero and all that. He's got a different fucking way. And his brain's different. And then when I could pick up on that, I could do it. And I realized the person wasn't special other than they had a different way of thinking, but they could give that. And then I would also read other books about like memory or speed reading or just whatever it was that I was trying to work on. And so I think the gift that I was given young is that I was able to unlock a couple of secret codes and realize that was a doable thing. And so then when I started doing anything, like BuildASoil was a secondary, it was a byproduct of my interest in growing. So yeah. I truly come after growing as, even though I'm only able to do so much, like as far as my growing style over the years, within that, I'm highly curious and I'm passionate about what might produce better results for me. And, you know, a lot of times that last 1%, you can spend eons researching and it's fun. It becomes like a lifelong pursuit. But what I also realized is the other 99%, you can teach to people pretty quickly. And so that began the business where I wanted to share some of the composts and materials. And I was having to access and source things from my own personal experiments from rare places. And I would have to like pay shipping out the wazoo. And nobody had what I was looking for. And so it just evolved. But, you know, I guess that's part of the story, right?
Well, the thing that I've kind of picked up on, the little community and the vibe that you've created for BuildASoil and the BuildASoil family is the willingness to share. And I think that was a vibe that I really picked up from Miles in my interactions with Miles, is that he's willing to share everything that he does. And I think that willingness to help the community grow, not just like plants, but within the concept of a community, I think is a powerful thing. And so can you kind of talk about how the community kind of shaped in that direction over time?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that was intentionally done, and it's because that's how I was taught. And a lot of the no-till philosophy was to share this information, partially because it was a subsection, like you had to share it or nobody else would do it. And we all wanted to learn from each other. And so we were on the forums and you'd be just trying to learn weird stuff and try it on your own. But one of the other things that I learned growing up was that the, like, the ability to share with people creates this law of reciprocity where they want to give back, and you create this communication. And in a community, it's good to be able to give, but you also have to be able to receive. And that creates like this duality. And a lot of people have problems with one side or the other. But
Yeah.
when you create community, it doesn't feel like that. And so as we were building BuildASoil, I wasn't special enough to say, this is how I do it and this is how you should do it. It was, I'm learning. Are you using the same shit to learn like I am? Let's do this together. And over the last decade, it's evolved into, hey, these are what we've picked up on as the best practices across the board in living soil that we notice other people doing and also having success with. And that eventually became the BuildASoil way, which was just an easy way for us to talk about all the steps that are within the system. But mainly that evolved because talking living soil can get a little bit boring because there's 1 billion ways to do the same thing. We have a lot in
Right.
common, right? But you can get scienced out real quick depending on who you're talking to. And for us to share it with everyone, we just wanted to make sure that people assumed like, hey, this is pretty simple. And it really, really can be. I overdo it a lot because it's fun and it's a hobby. And I think that it's really part of it to tinker. But at its base level, what we teach is very open source. It's very doable. And so that just translated into the business saying, hey, if we teach people all the recipes from day one and they can make it on their own, they'll have the best connection with their soil. And if they even buy one product from us, it's worth it. And what we found is a lot of us would grow up and get busy and sometimes need other products and reach out. And it created an entire like life for me. And I'm really grateful that we started it. So.
Well, we're going to kind of get into that. I'm a below the knee amputee and I have limitations. And so adapting a BuildASoil way is something I'm really curious to hear what your inputs are on that. And we do have a few questions before we jump into that,
Yeah.
but I'm really excited to have you break down some of these processes for people in these different scenarios.
Cool. So, Jeremy, yeah, we have a few questions, kind of general BuildASoil questions that we wanted to hit. First off, one of the things that I've really noticed about you and the company, I would say a core value is quality nutrients and kind of and knowing, sourcing your materials, knowing where it comes from. Can you talk about why that's important? Because I think when you're deciding what kind of stuff you buy, I could go buy blood meal from anywhere, right? And it's something that you talk a lot about in your videos. So could you just kind of explore that a little bit? Like, why is that something that should be important for someone?
So for most of us that are getting into gardening, like it's new. And so the ingredients, none of it really makes sense. So you see something that says like OMRI listed or organic, you're like, perfect, I'll grab that. You can grab it at Home Depot. But for a lot of us, when we go to say the grocery store, we're a little more discerning on the ingredients. Especially as you get older and wiser, I think that a lot of us that are enthusiasts of the natural ways, if we're already thinking that way, that mindset has been with me since my dad taught me about eating foods that you could read the ingredients of, and all the other chemicals that were out there. So I think that's one thing that connects a lot of us. But when you're reading the labels, I noticed a lot of things in common with the organic fertilizers that were on the market. And it seemed to be kind of like the type of marketing that's done with some of the fake health food where if you're really discerning, you can read the label and be like, oh, they're just marketing to the natural people that maybe not know better. And because there's a huge knowledge gap in gardening and because they're not eating it, there's a wide disparity in the differences and quality of amendments, nutrients, all that, especially in the organic side. And most of it is a recycled waste from different industries because it's just building gardening soil. So when you said blood meal, there's bone meal, there's chicken manure or poultry litter, feather meal. A lot of wastes from big businesses end up sold as organic gardening inputs. And one of the things that I found out when I started the living soil processes was that approved for organic use is different than organic. And not all of the ingredients that we carry are organic, but we've found them for specific reasons because they're likely to be cleaner than what's available on the market. They make a better environmental impact in their production. And oftentimes there's no market for an organic certification to pay for, but the growers are doing their best. So we look at everything across the board, just like when you look ingredients in a bag at the grocery store. So for instance, if you get bone meal, it's from pigs and cows, and it's from an industry where it's big slaughterhouse waste. And it's not that it comes from organically like raised, free grazing, grass-fed cattle. There isn't enough of that to start a bone meal production to sell. If there was, it would be, I think, worthwhile. And bone meal works great. So some of the reasons we exclude ingredients aren't because it's going to make your soil not perform. Some of them we think do affect that, some of them not as much. Bone meal, we use fish bone meal. And part of it is because that's not from, like, if you look at the deeper impact, oftentimes these big feedlots and situations with the chickens and the cattle, they're using Roundup Ready, GMO, like crops, right? Corn and other grains. And that's how we feed all the animals. And then as soon as that's done, from what we don't view as the best use of the soil and the inputs and the pesticides, and we could talk about that for days. But then that ends up as a waste stream that they label ready for organic use. And when I found that out, I was like, oh shit, these aren't from organic farms. I thought it like had to be, because when you're talking about food, it does, right? If you get an organic apple, it had to be grown organically. But if you take a non-organic apple and grind it up, it could be approved for organic use in compost. And so all of these thoughts become slightly different when you realize approved for organic use means it's just natural. It doesn't necessarily mean. Now, certain crops are different ways. So we could go deeper on that, meaning if there's not a huge market for it, but it's grown naturally, they can approve it for organic use. If there's an abundance like soy of organic non-GMO on the market, they must use the organic version, but that's not even guaranteed. And so we just take the strategy of saying, listen, if there's crops that make a better impact, like the neem cake or the karanja cake that was grown to produce an oil from nitrogen fixing trees that improve the soil of which they're grown on, replacing the citrus industry. It made a big impact. They're growing some of it on the Hawaiian Islands to replace the sugarcane that was taken out. There's camelina meal, there's mustard seed meal. These are using to create biofuels that the tractors run to not use the fossil fuels. And at the same time, they're producing all natural biofumigants that enhance the soil so you don't have to use chemicals to grow like strawberries or high dollar crops. So across the board, we're looking for things that have this synergy, and our low input crops would likely to be grown without pesticides or herbicides, avoiding the bone meals, the blood meals, the poultry litters. And in doing so, we've created a list of ingredients that we can use to make soil that's truly unique, because it's not the same that everybody uses. If you look at every potting soil that says organic on the back, typically you're going to be poultry litter from GMO corn-fed chicken, no doubt, okay? Then feather meal, same thing, GMO corn-fed, beakless, footless, ground up chicken feathers. I mean, it doesn't have to be like the happy version, and I've had chickens, I love them. I would use their feathers, right? And so it just becomes like a choice. And then other ingredients that you'll see in a lot of the potting soils kind of follow down the list. Cotton is another heavily Roundup Ready sprayed crop that when it's approved for organic use can have issues. Soy's on the list. There's a number of them. But when you look at BuildASoil's ingredients, we avoid most of those. And it's not like we're going to be truly better because of it. We're just, I think, different because of it. We're not the same. We make our own soil instead of some big factory doing it. And so if that's important to you, a lot of people want to make theirs from scratch.
Right.
Well, I think that speaks to our gardening community a lot, maybe from a cannabis perspective, more than maybe, just your average ag or growing type situation. I think people who want to grow their own vegetables and people who want to grow their own cannabis are kind of a different mindset. And so that's a little bit more important to them.
Yeah, and I think there's a trickle down. Cannabis has always had a big trickle down effect to the gardening community that picks up on what we learn. And so like heavy metals have a huge concern lately. We've had some issues even over the years because all these organic inputs, they're not synthetically made in a lab. They have fluctuations. So we've learned to avoid certain ingredients that can have bigger fluctuations. Like a seed meal has almost no chance of having a heavy metal. It does, but in comparison to something that's mined out of the earth, it could have pockets of differences depending on which type of mine and where that mine and which state it's a derivative of. And so now as we learn this, because it's costly, it's going to trickle down and there's going to be a benefit to even the home gardener. Now, some of it's just political. I think some of the concern with certain particular elements, but at the end of the day, I feel like when I used to look at hydro shops, not knowing what they were, there's just big tomatoes on them and stuff. You're like, right. Oh, they're growing weed. All this stuff's for weed. I didn't know, right? Right. And then the bale is pulled back, right? So I just think that it affects all of us in one way or another eventually. And a lot of times it's cannabis growers that are figuring a lot of that out. They're willing to spend more, try more. They want those results.
Totally. Well, so this next topic, or one of the topics that we wanted to touch on, was microbes. So JR is especially known for being a fan of microbes, but I was actually just talking right before we started recording. I was talking up bokashi, and I was loving the white fuzz that's popping up on the top of my pots. So can you talk a little bit about Rootwise and why you've recommended that a lot, and how you source microbes responsibly?
Yeah,
And yeah, JR also had a question just about like why are microbes a little, they're kind of expensive, you know what I
yeah, they're
mean?
expensive. It's kind of silly. Um, so there's a lot involved in microbes, and to make them duplicatable and have a quality lab that makes them, where there's DNA sequencing, there's actual good processes and quality control, and it's done in the United States. It definitely takes a production process and a business that has to heavily invest to be able to do this and have expensive employees that are running the machinery and a liability with expensive machinery. So I think it's kind of a natural byproduct that it's going to be a little more expensive than people expect. I hope that that changes over the years as it becomes a more popular thing, and that increases the demand for these types of products, and that increases the availability. Right. I know that when we released Rootwise, it's made at a lab in the United States that is really well known, and they are ubiquitous with quality. And when I was researching, just like mycorrhizae, there was only a couple labs, like one in Canada, one in the United States. And I'm sure there's a few more that I don't know about, right? But it's not like there's one in every city. And so then you start to notice that there's a lot of these Alibaba microbes where they're coming from other countries. And it could be that it's a phenomenal source. It could be that it's not. It's just like importing anything. But I also know that there's laws against importing microorganisms, and it gets weird.
Yeah.
So it could be that they're treated when they're being imported and we may not know about it. And then validating like DNA wise what you're ordering overseas versus what you get here without that trust and relationship over decades of a business self-facing and having United States customers that it has to fess up and speak to, and all the licensing and labeling requirements that come with that. It gives us a little more confidence. And then the fact that Rootwise was one of the first people to really believe in BuildASoil, that was a legendary grower, lived nearby where BuildASoil was at, and put off one of his last rounds before he moved out of Paonia, as just truly epic. And he did it in BuildASoil products, and he was using microorganisms the last few years. And it was out of a need that came from doing full season 10-pound plus plants in greenhouses that, it's different than like popping off a round where you veg for 5 days. You end up seeing if there's like possibility of disease incidents or issues with nutritional micronutrition deficiencies and things that I feel like it takes a better grower to accomplish. And I certainly am. I've never grown 15, 20-pound plants. Kevin has, and I really trust his opinion. And I also trust how these products helped him in a very unique way. His wife has got, I think, a master's. Together, they've got like homestead farming life experience, plus the greenhouse and grow, and just a resume to back it up online. It's pretty unreal. So I felt like I looked up to him, and he had this product that I knew was made at a United States lab that instead of having to go buy the nitrogen fixtures and then buy the mycorrhizae and then buy all these different ones, because at the time there was only like the popular ones from High Times that were always marketed everywhere. And you look and it was like endo and ecto. And for those that know, it's like for trees and for annuals. And so I'm like, well, why is half my money going to the tree stuff when I'm not growing stuff?
Right.
So as the community got smarter, it was harder for them to repackage one of the common ones released by MycoApply or one of the big manufacturers. There's only a couple people. And so when you realize all these products trickle down and maybe have an ingredient or two added to them, you're like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, where do I go to get the best product? And so at the time, and I think still to this day, Rootwise is the most complete. It's got the enzymes produced off of the same microorganisms that were found on healthy farms. So they're indigenous microorganisms. They're not like invented in the lab. They're from the healthiest farm. And so when you notice that they have the azose, which nitrogen fix, when it has the rhodopseudomonas that do some of the purple non-sulfur bacteria stuff that people are getting in a lot of other products that are like for phosphorus mobilization, when it has the enzyme producers that help produce that, you're like, okay, I get it now. Because in the beginning, I'm like, hey, I want to try this. And then I end up trying this. And I end up like 4 or 5 bags of different microorganisms that I'm messing with. And I feel like at a certain point, I'm not really a scientist. And I'm like, I'd rather just natural compost tea or buy something that's already balanced without me fucking with all the different types. So it's been our go-to. It's been one of our favorite products, our best-selling products, our highest reviewed products. And I think people are just now starting to really learn about how potent it is, because we can all do better research now than we used to be able to when microorganisms were like, you do what? Now
Yeah.
most people have heard of that. And like, at least people take enzymes for their gut. I mean, it's kind of it's a big deal.
Right.
And I think it's here to stay. But to be honest, when I started BuildASoil, I didn't think I'd carry a microbe product. I figured a worm bin is enough. And as we grew into a company, I'm realizing that I want to widen the margin of opportunity and minimize the margin of error so that our customers have the best chance of success as possible. And then they stick to it, right? And I've noticed these products really do help. So
And did you say we had a question from chat from Hunter Gatherer? Just a clarification: does Rootwise affect phosphorus uptake or anything?
yeah, that's part of what's designed into it. And so a lot of people will buy phosphorus uptake products. And I think that that's kind of piggybacked onto this thought that we all think we need lots more phosphorus based on the bloom boosters that you buy in a hydroponic world. And while I feel that it's definitely necessary, I feel like overdoing it's not going to really do anything. And having a lower amount was what BuildASoil, like the Coots recipe had no phosphorus input. And people are like, that's not going to work. But you start realizing that available amounts of phosphorus and then the ability to use the microorganisms to deliver it allow you to keep a better balance and still keep yields high. And then you're not dealing with nutrient take up problems because you're overdoing. And that began the goal of keeping the soil forever by never overdoing it, keep it in a balanced window, and never throwing it away. And people
That's
started
cool.
doing like no-till indoors. And it created some different viewpoints because you weren't just throwing the soil away. But either
Yeah.
way, I think that phosphorus is still important. Mobilization, mycorrhizae has always helped with, but there are other enzyme producers and phosphorus mobilizers that are part of the Rootwise package that you can also find singularly for a similar price in other products, where these are combined to work in consortium together. So
All right. Well, we've got a few more questions that we'll try to get through before we go into like different grow scenarios that we wanted to try to get through today. But I know JR, you had a question actually that kind of dovetails nicely into what we were just talking about, which was essentially about flushing and how, and when you're growing with synthetic nutrients, a lot of growers, they stop using nutrients at some point and they do what's called flushing, where when you're growing in soil, you don't have to do that. The plant just like somehow takes care of it all and you don't have to worry about it. So can you talk about like what's happening, especially with the ripening process? It seemed like JR, is that correct? You wanted to touch on that in
yeah,
particular?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And especially in relationship to how the living soil battery has, that microbe interaction. And then with the more traditional indoor growing, we had that tapering down of nutrients, flush cycle, rob them of everything, get everything out of the medium approach.
okay. So I think this is a huge, like this is one of the biggest subjects that we could discuss. And so I'll do my best to really try and keep it short. I tend to talk. This has been an argument since day one, but it's also just been, I think, differences. And one of the true benefits that I find in living soil is that I found that these are annual flowering plants. And I didn't really know that when I first started, didn't know what that meant, but they're not meant to live for multiple years. Obviously, you can keep a mom plant around, but its goal is to grow, to flower, to die, and to reproduce. And so when we remove that male, we are getting these buds that we want, and they're not going to be pollinated with seed, but they're not supposed to live further. And so when I started growing in soil, I was like, well, when do I know when to flush, or what do I do? And the plant would get to the end of its life a lot of times longer than the 50, 55, 57, 60, 62 days that the pack would say, sometimes 75, 80 days. But sure enough, it would do what they call senesce. And I had no clue what that meant when I first started. And now I realize that a lot of plants, they'll go in fall. It's a little different, but it's a similar. What our plants do, well, they will senesce, meaning they're going to just take their natural trip towards death. And they're going to stop taking nutrients up. They're going to start mobilizing other nutrients from their leaf to live just a little bit longer. Oftentimes outdoors, that means cooler weather, less biology, less nutrient uptake, more moisture starving them out. And so there's some biomimicry aspect there that some of us take to tend to the environment to create that effect. But at no point are we telling the plant, and this is a key difference. I used to picture like a lab coat and like a clipboard for growing hydroponic and like overalls for growing living soil. And I don't think that that's 100% the same, but the picture is being more of a steward and not being in control so much. But when your genetics truly show you they want to finish, they will. And it's a really rewarding feeling. It might be 75, 80 days in and they're starting to fade hard and you're going, oh yeah, it's happening. I didn't really do anything different. Now, to be fair, we're not really feeding. And if we are adding anything supplemental, most living soil growers are going to stop past the point of diminishing return, like halfway through flower or so. Some people use, extra stuff towards the end, like sugars and whatever else. But for the most part, we're kind of water only. And so there's no real opportunity to flush. And the other thing is we don't want to take a 4x4 bed of soil and run rivers of water through it. It's kind of detracting from keeping the soil forever. But when you understand senescence is happening and you understand that flushing is the forced causing of that, we're going to let it naturally happen. And so I will agree that if you have tons of nutrients in the soil and you do harvest at a shorter window, I think that there could be a negative effect on the quality that might take more curing or may never truly be as good as had you let it finish. But if you flush, you can get there. I just don't know if you would have gotten the same result naturally letting it finish. And so they're two different conversations. I still feel like we're going through a similar process at some point. And there's a lot of arguments about flushing. Does it matter? And I think that smokers are just trying to get the best quality smoke, regardless of, like, none of us truly care, but a lot of us really care about what we think gets to that result, right?
Yeah.
We all want, like, you just want to smoke that fire. And I really, as I got older, like I'll be 40 this year, I like to run. And if it affects my lungs negatively, I'm aware of that. And that's partially why I don't like dab pins as much. They fuck with my lungs somehow. I don't know. I don't think
Yeah, they do.
it's like flour, And when it's clean grown, it burns right. Like it tends to be like better for me. And I do it daily, so it's important.
No, I hear you, man. I've been using these vape pins a lot lately, and I've noticed it kind of fucks with your.
I don't know what it is. It could be in there, it could be not, whatever. I even have homies that make like literally rosin, like carts with nothing in them, and they're really, but I gravitate towards flour, and it could be that that's terrible for me too. I don't fucking know, but I could be a hypocrite too.
So kind of back to, I want to get through all this stuff. I do have one more question about the previous subject. Do you think part of the reasoning, the ripening in soil is because it's pulling what it needs, where with maybe a synthetic or a synganic approach, you're more pushing what it needs and you have to dial that in just perfectly, whereas with an evolutionary pull of what it needs, it's been doing it for eons and knows what to do?
Yes, and there has to be a trust there, because a lot of us tend to come from that mindset where we overdo it because we're waiting for those plants to really rely on us, and they truly are independent. And the biggest difference makers, most new people start off in like a 5-gallon because it's pretty big compared to what they were used to before. And when they break that, and with that, they have to break the ability that they can just pick up the plant and move it wherever they want, anytime they want. And if they give up on that and they go with a bigger battery of soil, like you've called it, they have so much raw horsepower. I think it blows their mind on the plant health, for one, because they don't have to be perfect anymore. It's like this effect where you have a swimming pool and a goldfish as opposed to a goldfish in a cup, where now you better be a mad scientist. No pH, no nitrogen. That fish is going to die. But when it put in like just the volume makes so much difference. It really lower the pressure. However, if you still overdo it, you're still creating biologically available nutrients that the plant kind of has to take up because it needs to drink water. And so when you get to no-till after time, it's really just on the top and you've depleted a lot of the soil, and it creates this ease of ability where it's harder to overdo it because you're not mixing it in every time. And it has these feeder roots versus down below. Earthbox hacks that kind of right away. It can dangle in clean water and drink clean water where you can put the nutrients on top, and it creates a duality effect there. But anytime I think we get involved in trying to steer it a little harder, we now have to deal with the ramifications, where when you really have a big battery of soil and it's not overdone, you can almost trust the plant, like you're saying, for thousands of years of doing what it's going to do. It's going to die. And with that, it's going to fade. And with that, you're going to get the quality that you're looking for. But if you go, well, it's day 60 and you harvest and it's still green and it hasn't even begun its senescence yet, go longer and learn, like, just see truly how amazing that plant can be.
So we had a question from chat, from a couple people. I think, let's see who that we had. It was from CannaBuzz and Hunter Gatherer and a couple others. They were like, "Hey, that's a good question." And it was essentially, how can synthetic growers, because many growers, they start growing synthetically. In my case, you like buy literally the thing that pops up on Amazon at the top, and it's probably one of the big name companies, you know what I mean? And you're growing from those bottles. Yeah, exactly. And then you decide at some point, maybe you listen to this podcast or whatever, you want to make a switch. How can people kind of ease into it without killing everything they've got going on right now or ditching everything? Like how can people kind of ease into this way of growing?
Man, that's a good question. I was growing in a recirculating deep water culture system, and I was proud of it. Built it from scratch. It was really fun with a buddy of mine, and I had somebody drop in from what became the Living Organic Soil forums and some friends with Afghanistan and MGD. But anyways, somebody dropped in and was like, "Yo, that looks like hella hard," because I was trying to do organic in it at that point because I was trying all sorts of everything new at the grow store, like whatever. I wanted to get the best. And they're like, "Yeah, that seems like a lot of work. I just put water in here in this living soil." And I was like, "What?" So I started to kind of venture over to that. But I had this prized possession. I didn't want to just throw it all away. I'd spent a lot of money on it. So that's kind of what became me forcing to try and do organics and teas and all sorts of stuff in hydro versus just switching over to soil. And I also had this feeling like, for whatever reason, that soil was kind of inferior. When I first started, like hydro was the fucking way. That's what you're hearing. Like, you just hear like, let me get some of that hydro, you know? And so I was like, hell yeah. And then I was like, what's in this bottle? Can I feed it to my tomatoes? And I was like, fuck, bro, I don't know. Do I flush the tomatoes? Like, and so with all those questions, you start getting different answers. And then I realized, holy shit, organic farms have like a lot of studies that back this up. And I buy organic food because I'm trying to avoid the chemicals. And I know I'm not going to spray pesticides on my plant. So it may be a difference in like what we're talking about, but I still cared enough to start researching it. And when I got into living soil, I wanted to transition as the key point, and I didn't know what to do. And so I just started small. I just started with like a couple of containers that were a little bit larger and decided to try it. And at that time, you had to basically mix your own. If someone really wants to try it, we have this take and bake kit. You don't have to buy it. You can just read like the ingredients and go buy some shit locally. You could go around in the forums. There's enough connection out there to figure this out. But essentially following like a Coots recipe or a homemade recipe to start, it fully connects you to this process. You feel like you made a homemade meal for the first time for your plants. And when you see the health that comes out of doing one or two plants, it'll blow your mind. And I think that you'll really now start to think differently about your other setup and think, okay, how do I transition fully? And if it turns out it's too like it's not up your alley, then you haven't gone all the way. And you know, half the fun of gardening and growing is to try different things. So I will say we have two ways to start, and they will give you the best results. And here's what I would recommend. I told you the number one problem we've noticed: people want to pick up and move plants, and they're married to that, and they do like a 5-gallon. The name of the game in no-till or living soil is to maximize soil per canopy. However the hell you want to do it, it doesn't matter. If you want to put, 25 gallons in there, you want to put two 50 gallons or a 100 gallon. We're just trying to get more soil per canopy, and we tend to get better yield, better quality when doing that and make our life easier. The preference of the BuildASoil philosophy is to start off at 15 gallons the minimum. And so I've had people that are disabled and have not the capability to lift anything much heavier than that on their own, let alone that, have better yield and success with less work by having a little help initially and then having that setup go. So that's one of the things I want to talk to you about, because I'm unaware of some of the challenges that the BuildASoil way brings to the situation. And I'd love to discuss that. But essentially, the earth box or a 15-gallon minimum, like grassroots living soil container or even a hard plastic, that's what I suggest people start with as their one pot to try. And the earth box takes the watering guessing out, which means that if you're concerned with watering properly, because if you don't, the nutrient and biology won't cycle properly. If you overwater, it's going to lack nutrient uptake. If you're really underwatering, it can make it seem like the plants are burning just a little bit. Once you learn that, it's kind of game over. And so the earth box is a sub-irrigation that automatically waters. And in our season 5, we're going to be putting together a blue mat, an auto pot, and an earth box in the same quadrant to compare all automatic watering styles. But that's one way to dip your toe in if you're already familiar with like the hydro, where the watering is kind of like you can't overwater hydro, right? Unless we're talking soilless, but there's different considerations. So those are my best. Earth box, 15-gallon minimum. A lot of people start smaller. If you start at 15 minimum, I think you can really get easy results. And then that'll give you enough confidence to go through all the learning curves that'll come. So
excellent. We're gonna break that down, and I think that's a good segue into switching gears, don't you think, Sam?
Sure, yeah, let's do it. So So we wanted to kind of talk about a few different scenarios. The first scenario was going to be growing outdoors in pots. So the scenario that we were going to use was selfishly my backyard, which is basically, anywhere in North America, but I'm in California and I'm growing in 30-gallon fabric pots. So I love fabric
Bigger.
pots. I use grassroots. Yeah. So let's just kind of talk about what people should get started with. That was literally the first question, which is how big of the pots. And then, we have follow-up questions about soil and kind of the soil solution. I love your craft blend. So if you want to give that a shout out and, how that works into things. But let's start with the basics first. Pot size, growing outdoors in your backyard. A lot of places have plant count limits of like 6 plants. So 30 gallons, but maybe I should go bigger. What do you think?
Yeah, so this is great conversation. So remind me to talk about the complete organic fertilizer like report because that'll help discuss craft blend. And I'm smoking, so I might forget. But as far as container size goes, okay, here's the consideration, right? You've got great weather. You could put them out too early in too small of a container, and your flower is still not going to come until the sun's ready, right? So it's not like you can be like, oh, I'm done vegging. So it's a game of target size. Size is kind of irrelevant without timing. You have to have the timing and the size of container both in mind, and then you're going to crush it. And let me give you an example. So 30-gallon to me is a June, July planting and a small plant. And the reason why is I like to grow plants that stretch a little bit. And a lot of times outdoors with a slow faded flower, you're going to get more stretch anyways. And so I want to be able to be prepared to trellis it. And I would rather, without plant count, have smaller plants that I don't have to climb on a ladder for. The reason why people do, 10 plus pounds is because of plant count. So if you want to have 6 plants, then bigger containers the only way to go to get more yield. And what I mean by that is that's truly what controls it. And so if you're going to early to get big plants, I'm talking like Rootwise's last row in a greenhouse. Even in Paonia bad weather, he did full season because it was in a greenhouse with lifted sides, everything. So you can go 15 foot plus, 600 and 400 gallon containers, open bottom to a foot of soil prepared with cover crop beforehand above native soil. We're talking unlimited horsepower. And he knows what he's doing. So, I mean, that predictability of needing to push the envelope there and how much space you have before it hits the greenhouse. You can see Jay Plant Speaker doing similar things where he's got a limitation of the greenhouse ceiling and he has a certain container size and it starts at a certain time. And he uses a whole trellis system, which is different based on his environment and his weather and lots of reasons on a farm. And so you're going to have your own reasons. Your backyard fence might be like, yo, I don't want to go taller than that. Or, hey, I have a greenhouse. And so you've got to size it. And I'm not a world-class outdoor grower. I just know how to grow good herb for myself. And what I've noticed learning these things is if I plant like in an earth box, man, I'm going to plant like July, a small plant, it'll just blow up and I'll get like half pound to a pound off of it. If I plant a 30-gallon and I plant it in like May, I get beat up a little by the weather out here, might be better there, but I can over veg it. It can be so big that it starts to run out. Now I have to feed it. Now the plant is overgrowing the container. And so I feel like it's easier to have a little bit bigger, especially if you're trying to maximize yield off one plant, because now you're unlikely to overdo it on your veg time. Alternative to that is don't rush it, like just crush it. You get out there in June. For us, the wind in the first week of June is real bad. Second week starts to get great. And so I just transplant out a little bit later. It'll fully fill that container. Like even in a 65-gallon planting second week of June, it'll fill it. And so I like to go a little bit bigger if I can. Otherwise, if it's a plant count thing, then I just wait longer. I'm sorry, meaning if there's unlimited plant count or I just don't care, I just wait longer. And a lot of times I'll plant smaller plants in July so I can have lots of flavors. They're not huge. I barely have to deal with them at all because they just don't become raging monsters that I have more defoliation and more just stuff going on and trellis and all that. So to keep it simple, I just grow more small plants, even outdoors, and you leverage the power of the sun. Make your life super easy. You can do automated watering. There's like a million different angles at it that are just easier when you have the wind and the elements and everything going for you that you don't have indoors. But number one, if you don't have a trellis plan and you get a good yield, it can be just devastating to have bud rot or to have snap in the mud and just like, different considerations outdoors, right? So for you, 30-gallon would be fine. Plant in June would be fine. But just know that don't go put like a 3-footer, 4 or 5 footer in there in a 30-gallon that you've been growing for 3 months waiting for June. Just go put a nice clone out there, or put like a nice 1 gallon out there in June, and you'll crush a 30-gallon. Might even outgrow it just a little bit. But I think that's that timing and that relationship of size. And I think 30 is about the minimum. I've grown great 30 gallons outdoors. Worst case, as you get to flower, if you see it's pretty big, top dress some craft blend or your own complete organic fertilizer, which you can learn how to make from our report, which is what we learned from Steve Solomon, from The Intelligent Gardener, from a book on freaking gardening. Like, we didn't invent any of this shit. We're just sharing information that we've seen works for us. So
that's one of the resources we would like people to be able to access. So we've now got our pot size. We've now got an idea of our planting strategy. What are going to be our resources to build our soil blend that's going to carry us through a veg transition and bloom? And will we be adding teas or any of that kind of fun stuff?
So I love to add teas, and you certainly can. Most outdoor growers are making like a nutrient tea, I would call it. A lot of times they've got a way to deliver water because they want to deliver stuff that's kind of funky. They're not relying on drip. A lot of guys are using hand watering with a sump pump. We carry one specifically made for it. There's lots of different things that you can use to water. And that's one of the ideas you have to connect. And then you'll say, okay, in that style, is there a way where I'm just going to hand water some teas in, or what am I going to do? And when I first started, a tea very specifically meant a microbial tea with just compost and a food source, aerated for a very specific time at a target dissolved oxygen level. And we were trying to like geek out on that shit because it was all about biology, cycling nutrients that were in the soil, because it's all just slow release organics. We need it to be consumed and released to the plant. So teas were a regular thing, because if you put all these amendments in there and you test the soil, it doesn't always change exactly as the math says. And the plants have to dynamically pick up those nutrients. So teas were important, but I feel like most growers were mixing in what they needed at the time extra, organics alive and aminos and liquid fish and stuff that truly is water soluble nutrients, but they're still brewing it maybe only for a few minutes and then deploying. And so there's different styles, right? But we're all just trying to keep available organic nutrients, depending on the size of the plant, in flux, whether that's using biology to release it because it's there, top dressing way ahead of time, making something soluble. We're just trying to make them happy.
So yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I'm also going to try to pin you on the soil, building the soil bit, because you didn't talk about that. So I wanted you to talk about craft blend, because I just think that's such a great solution for people that are just getting started, and that's what this is what I really wanted to touch on, to really help people understand how they can grow outside, and it's not like some overwhelming beast that they have to understand. I think you've really helped kind of get those core things that you need and throw them all together.
Yeah, and grow a tomato plant outside too, because if you grow bigger tomatoes besides cherries, you have to learn how to water properly, or they're going to rip. And if you don't have a little bit of nutrition, they'll get bottom end rot. You'll still get great results. But if you just pick up on those little nuances, it helps you see that in cannabis as well. And the craft blend is 15 ingredients. I told you in the beginning, we're really weird about ingredients. A lot of people follow us for that. And so what we've done is we're like, man, we have this whole warehouse of ingredients. I've got a friend at the time that was growing outdoor more than I'd ever seen, and did a great job. And he was always buying stuff from us. He would test his soil at the lab. We would I'd be like, buy a 50-pound bag of that, buy this, buy that, buy that. And they just make, cups of this. And he's like, bro, can you just mix this all in one bag for me? Because this is a pain in the ass, bro. I'm busy. And so I was like, you don't get it, bro. We're like single source. We're like the heady, like straight up one ingredient at a time. And so I took his advice. And at the same time, I also wanted to use it. I was taking it home because I don't want to have 15 50-pound bags to scoop different scoops out of, even though I wanted, to play with that. So we just mix it all together, and it's a pain in the ass. We have to have truckloads of crap from all over the country come in and be consistently in supply, and make sure that we can mix it all together in a huge machine that drops it into a huge bag that we then weigh out all by hand. And I mean, it's epic. And so to be able to just grab a bag, have a whole bunch of really rad ingredients in one. And then what we did is we balanced it where it's not like just the fertilizer or just the mineral component, it's all of them combined. And so it's got our favorites like the gypsum and the oyster shell flour, and it's got basalt rock dust. And when you start learning, you'll see what I'm saying, you start to unlock different levels, and you learn living soil, and you go down these rabbit holes where you're like, oh, biochar, oh my God, rock dust, remineralizing the earth. That's what volcanoes do. And then you just start going down all these different levels. And so each one of these ingredients came from oftentimes those different searches that we went on. And so now they're just mixed in a bag, and you get a lot of what we call a complete organic fertilizer that was coined because Steve Solomon wrote a book, and it's called The Intelligent Gardener, and it's based on how to test soil. That way you can interpret it to organic amendments to be generally in a balanced range so your plants grow healthy. And there's a lot of math involved in it, but a lot of what you pick up is that he gives you a basic recipe. And he's like, I mean, like as a human, you're like, all right, so if I eat a little bit of like meat, or if I'm vegetarian, but I know I eat something with a little more protein, like some beans or something, but I also have my greens. And I also have, like, we know how to build a meal that's probably healthy for us. But for a plant, it's like, I don't fucking know what they need. And so the complete organic fertilizer was, hey, if you have some seed meal, you have a good calcium source, you have a phosphorus source, you have something for trace mineral nutrition, you are covered. And he teaches you how to just make this with what you have. And so we followed those principles when we built craft blends. So it wasn't just a wild mix. We put even weights, but we chose them so that when they added up, it was a little more phosphorus than potassium, which the way the labeling works, make them a little bit more close to equal, which we've noticed is good balance. It had some slow release nitrogen, and it had unbelievable amounts of diversity in it, and all these rock dusts and sources of trace minerals. And so it's become one of our best selling products and our go-to. And at home, if you go to the blog, buildasoil.com, you go to the blog, you can see there's a free report on how to make your own complete organic fertilizer. You just type in your email, it gives you the whole PDF, and it explains how to make it from like scratch. So you don't have to buy anything from us. And I think that understanding those principles when we teach them helps people understand why they might buy a product from us someday. And then it's truly a relationship where I'm not just selling something. I want people to understand why we made it. And if they're still into it, that's awesome. If not, and they can make it on their own, that's awesome too. And that's what's kept us going for the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, and that's been one of the great things about seeing you scale this business is you started with the basics, with the literal like single ingredients, and then eventually there's enough demand for like, dude, can you just bag this whole thing for me? And then you do it. And then you're like, dude, can you just actually just mix this in soil for me? So then eventually you've been, selling that. So because we actually just had a question for if you sell it. Yeah. So, actually, I have a follow-up question for you, Jeremy, about before we move on to the next kind of section, is re-amending. Actually, two questions. One is re-amending. So, with that 30-gallon, when I'm mixing 30 gallons with like craft blend, I think that's like 16 cups of nutrients or something like that. It's a decent amount. And if I just like pour all that on the top of a 30-gallon or 60-gallon, that's just like, that's a decent amount of stuff. So how should I mix that?
Okay, I got the answer. So I got excited because we addressed this in season 4 on our YouTube series. And I think it's like called re-amending, or 3 different ways or 2 different ways or something. All right. Now, hopefully what I'm trying to do is teach that we're nobody special at BuildASoil. You can do this totally on your own. And you'll hear me to this day say, make your own soil from scratch. Like, we have a whole machine that does it, but it can't sit there with its own 2 hands and break up every clod and put that love in there like a homemade meal. We love it when people make their own soil. And so when you're trying to re-amend soil that you care that much about, it goes deep. And so in that top layer, one of the things we did in season 4 is we discussed how a farm does it. Yeah, I might have 2 feet deep or 1.5 feet deep of potting soil, but when I'm re-amending in what we call the no-till method, I'm not dumping the soil out and mixing it, okay? I'm just putting it right on top, which is safer, but also more volume. It gets weird. We treat the top 6 inches as the measurement for what I'm re-amending, not the entire volume of the container. And while you can do the entire volume of the container, I think it makes more sense in this approach because you can always add more later. And I think it's better. Like if you picture a fire, we're not trying to put all the firewood in the fire and light it. We're trying to get it going where it's going to be warm and sustain us. And then we add 1 log at a time and we keep an even keel so we're in the target zone. And that's where top dressing comes in. So if you're going to have some downtime or maybe you're the last round was huge and you really want to do a full re-amend, on the top dress layer in our 3x3 container, we address the top 6 inches for our math. And so that would decrease the volume that you're actually applying. And then you can top dress before you get to flower in that round again, if you really want to, depending on how the plants are reacting. But part of the BuildASoil way is that less is more. And I feel like we get a better reaction trying to keep in the target zone than go down to 0 and bump it back up to 100 again. So
totally. And then my last big
Otherwise, you
question.
just wiggle it in. Just wiggle it in with your fingers. Break it all into the top, okay? Tilth
Yeah.
it. Do like a top 1 or 2 inches to break it down. Water it in. And then here's the other thing. If you think you've overdone something, run around a cover crop on it and get it to balance that shit for you. Really helps buffer any of the excesses of sodium, bicarbonate. Just excesses are what cause problems a lot of times in living soil. Okay.
So the one last piece, big piece for outdoor growers is IPM. I get my ass handed to me by bugs every freaking year, and it's a different bug each time. And so, as a grower, you just learn each time like what you got to do, right? And so
Yep.
here in North America, some of the stuff that I've seen a lot, JR and I were just talking about how thrips here on the West Coast just seem to be a
Yeah.
fact of life. I've seen spider mites, aphids, budworms, caterpillars. I get those really bad at certain times of the year, and they
Yep.
just always love my biggest colas every year. So, can you, and then bud rot, of course, when it starts raining in
Yep.
September and October. So, can you talk us through a little bit? I know that's a huge subject. We could do a whole show on that too.
You hit
But
every
yeah,
one of them though, like
yeah,
perfect. I mean, there's obviously more, but you hit the number ones across the board. I think that ubiquitously across the country, maybe one is more prevalent, but
yeah,
you're going to see almost all of those if you grow outdoor every year, especially depending on where you live, right? You might be in a pocket where there's only one specific in a city. You might be near a farm where one's more, relevant there. But we have to be prepared. And so I'd love to discuss some of this with you. Um, Obviously, ideally, we would be like greenhouse, the whole deal, because there's just shit that you have to be prepared to give some to nature. I guess that's the long and short. You're going to be outside. And so be prepared to have 5 to 10%. Any more than that, I feel like we've done a bad job. If you get a tiny bit of bud rot in one area, but you visually inspect everything else, maybe it was the biggest, or maybe a worm got in. Like if you have a bug net, you can stop the moths that come put them in. Or if you're in a greenhouse, you can have insect screening. You can physically stop this. So you're not spraying material product, but that may be a cost prohibitive. And so we just have to be prepared. And so with that one in particular, you'll see them flying like the butterflies, the moths that lay these like eggs that then I'm not very proficient with all the terminology, but you know what I'm talking about. And you just want to keep them off. And so there's a number of things that you can spray that are safe to make it kind of inhospitable. But here's the BuildASoil way. Here's the philosophy. And this is nothing that we invented. This is just what I've noticed all of us end up doing over time. A lot of times we'll do nothing and just hope we write it out and it goes perfect. And typically that's not the case. Outdoor, you might get really comfortable where you live after some experience. But when you're brand new, you don't know what you don't know. And it could be your neighbor, it could be the worst nightmare. And so you've got to be prepared. And so we like to have 2 to 3 products prepared as tools in our armor or like in our tool shed that are ready to go. They're all safe and natural. We believe in and affect things differently. And we're ready to go hard and rotate those if we need to, because there's no like true pesticide that we're going to use. And we're really just trying to keep the plant clean. We're really trying to keep our situation clean. We're trying to make it so that we're protecting the plant, but we're not going to spray anything that's going to like eradicate everything. There are a few biologicals that work really well. So when you mentioned thrip, one of the things that you can use that's not on the cannabis approved list is, I believe it's the spinosad bacteria. It comes in Captain Jack's dead bug and a number of other ones. Used really early on, a lot of us believe that that's very safe biology that was found naturally that works incredibly well. But people abuse it because they spray it on buds. And I don't believe that's safe because I don't know enough about the biology. And I think they've made it illegal for a reason. At least I'd like to think that that's not purely political, but spraying on the buds is a no-no. And because bud worms are such a big problem, a lot of people do it because of the commercialization. But as a home grower, you could do your own research, pick and choose what you think is really personally safe. That eradicates thrips. The reason why I mention it is Clackamas Coot taught me that was like the organic nuclear bomb. It gets spider mites and thrips and it mostly eradicates them so that you don't have to deal with it again. Our number one way is preventative. Just like with being a healthy human, a lot of times we're preventing these problems. And so what I would say is grow from seed. You will eliminate most of your big issues. Like literally, they just surprise you on a full season. What was riding in from clones from your buddies. And so growing from seed, that really does help eliminate a lot of the potential worst ones that come from the industry. Other than that, having the 3 products. So Jadam wetting agent, that's something you can research, make on your own. And then that translates to like liquid soap. I mean, there's basics you can get down to. We have a free IPM report that we did on the Adam Dunn show. You can Google and see that whole episode. Like there's a lot of do-it-yourself products. Okay, our EM5 represents what is a do-it-yourself product. Essentially, none of them are going to like kill every thrip you have or every spider mite you have. But if we're in a preventative maintenance mode where we've got a good sprayer, we can get the underside of the leaves, the top of the leaves. We have a very healthy plant. What typically happens is we have a watering issue. We have a wilting event. We have a lack of nutrition at some point. All of a sudden, it kind of calls in a lot more pests than I think would normally be there. I'm not saying healthy plants don't get pests. By far, that's not true, but they tend to not call them in so hard. You're doing a good job and you notice something. Now you're not in prevention mode. We're really going to triple down. Instead of a once a week of one of these 3 natural products that I like, an enzyme spray, a homemade spray, do some research. There's a lot of great products out there. Then I go to every single day. And I do that for a minimum, like the first week. And if I don't have the capability, at least for the first 3 days, then every other day, I just treat it like it's all out fucking war because I'm not using poisons. I have to go like literally clean it like by hand practically. And I'm not washing the leaves, but I'm literally spraying every single bit. And depending on what the problem is, there might be a different tactical solution that you try. Jadam teaches that there's different natural herbs that they grow, they boil or they make solutions with them. And when they use those herbs, they just try with their wetting agent to use it on the pest until they notice which one kills it. Then they use all of that herb along with their wetting agent, and then they go attack it. So the Jadam wetting agent, we've noticed, suffocates aphids phenomenally well. On our vegetable farm, we were able to successfully use it. AJ from Growing Organic makes that product mainly because a lot of people don't like to make soap where you have like lye and gloves and mask and stuff. But
yeah,
the Jadam, you can PDF, like you can literally make it. An alternative from that is like Dr. Bronner's soap, like just Castile soap from the grocery store, organic soap. And then you use 1 ounce per gallon and you spray the plants and you make it just, they will go to other plants or they will just die. And so a lot of times we fail to look at in organic growing what a little bit of elbow grease with some natural products can really, truly do. And you have to get the underside of the leaves. You have to get the top. And I like to rotate a few different products and that'll handle thrips, aphids, spider mites, a lot of them. And man, that bud rot, I do like to top or bend or train so you don't have one huge cola. Use plants that stand up. Like when you're buying seeds for outdoor, it makes a lot more sense to find a reputable seed dealer that really knows that these are going to work well and stand up to powdery mildew, be strong outdoors. It's like if you just get some shitty genetics, it's fun to try any flavor indoors. You can control a lot more, just looking for terps. But when you have bad structure and bad genetic background as far as plant health, you can ruin a whole outdoor season. It's different than indoors. And especially if you have snow coming, you have to finish on time. You have to get advice from people that have grown in your type of situation and trust that the breeder you're getting from is probably going to have the goods. But indoors, you can like, who cares? Go 100 days, go 50 days. Like, it doesn't really matter, right? You can just be along for the ride.
No, that's a great point. It's something that I've really come to appreciate myself because, you can get any clone or any seeds, thankfully, access, like we give away seeds or whatever. Yeah. But you have to grow what works in your area. And JR and I, when we were at the Emerald Cup this past December, I went up to various, great NorCal growers that are growing gigantic trees and they're not pulling down tons of bud rot, right? And I asked them, like, how do you do this? And they've had to figure out those genetics that work.
They have to learn the hard way. And that's why buying seeds has become something like, dude, it used to be so fucking important. When you're growing outdoor, your whole life is on the line. You've got big plants. And then you find out that this fucking plant gets bud rot and everything else so easily compared to anything else that you could have gotten. That's why packs would cost. People would put 10 years of siphoning down what would actually work in that environment, offer it to you as heirloom seeds. And so it's different than what we see in every part of the industry. So when you're growing outdoors, you need to, I think, understand that that's slightly different and go for that. And I'm not an outdoor expert by any means, but I've done enough to know that it makes a difference. And so pay attention to that and pay attention to container size. We kind of skipped over soil building, but that's a deep topic. We have a free report on a website that kind of pops up different soil recipes. Essentially, the classic has been a third peat moss, a third pumice or some aeration, a third really premium compost, and then you want to have nutrients and minerals like we discussed throughout this episode. But man, That would be a whole nother one for us to visit, I think, one day.
Oh yeah, you have. I mean, we could talk for hours and hours and hours. And we really appreciate your time today. People, if you want to dive really deep into building soil and literally watch Jeremy build a soil, he mentioned, he name dropped earlier the take and bake uh, uh, package. That's a great package if you're looking to get started, and you can watch a video of Jeremy build that together and mix it all up and talk through the whole thing. It's a really great video. But
Yeah, that's
Jeremy, let's
awesome.
see. Another couple things before we let you go that I wanted to hit on. Let's see. Um, JR, was there one that you want to make sure that you hit on before we let him go? I wanted to
Yeah,
ask.
well, obviously, selfishly for
Oh
myself, I
yeah,
would
that's
like.
right. Let's do that one. Let's do that one.
Okay,
Let's do
so
it.
my situation, Jeremy, is I'm limited physically. I have a flower room. I have three 4x4s, and I, like you said, I use the biggest soil battery I can manage. And so for me, that's shoving 4 10-gallon pots in a 4x4 tray. So
Okay.
if I'm trying to I'm a Synganic. I use organic inputs, a little bit of salts, and a shit ton of microbes. If I'm wanting to kind of phase out of that salt situation and start pulling instead of pushing, um, I would kind of like a way to get my soil in the pot without mixing 130 gallons of soil at one time, and I would like to
Yep.
be able to get from, the transition all the way through flower and ripening in my flower room. Help me.
Okay. I love it. So first off, timing in a 10-gallon. Important. Plug the clone in, flip the flower in less than 10 days. You can go a little bit longer, but I don't like to see vegging like, hey, I'm on 40 veg. I'm going to flip the flower soon. I'm like, oh, you got 100 gallons. I just feel like in a dialed in environment. Now, sometimes we have things that stunt us for a day or two. We know what we're doing, but I'm just trying to give you an image of to have the healthiest, easiest path to growth for anybody that's doing this, that's limited on the volume of soil. Flip the flower slightly earlier than you would want with a stretchier strain. If you notice it doesn't stretch at all, and you know that in your genetic, obviously veg to the right size, but keeping it as above, so below. Picture the canopy space that you're going to develop by how long you veg. You want to mirror that with your root zone, and you'll have less problem in needing to give them the push. They'll be able to pull. If you have so much plant mass, it's not really about the total nutrients. It just can't keep up. Your biology cannot deliver that much food that quickly to a fast growing annual plant if it outpaces its root zone capability. And so, a couple of things that you can look at. Organics Alive, product line that we carry, you can buy other places. It is made by fermentation, fed organic sugar, then they arrest it and they create the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, and they blend it together. So what you're getting is a carbon-based, fully water-soluble nutrient. And because it's carbon-based, it has a little bit of hang time and will allow the pull instead of just the push, even though it's water-soluble. And that's when you use very small amounts. And so you can take Organics Alive, use that as a water-soluble powder, make that comfort that you're going steps towards fully organic instead of the salts, so to speak. Now it's not just a nutrient salt, it's biology byproduct with carbon. And so you're one step closer. And then as you determine that you've targeted the right launch size from your flip to flower, you may not need much, if any, of that. And you might be able to get away with just brewing a compost tea, which to us is a really good worm casting, a little bit of a food source like a liquid fish or a molasses, bubbling it for 24 hours and watering it in helps with that. You might have a biology product like Rootwise or something that you already use, and you're trying to keep that little top dressing that you're going to use in a 10-gallon. It's a little small. So we recommend the homemade complete organic fertilizer or some craft blend, and you sprinkle it around the top of the plant. If you do it before you need it, you'll develop feeder roots that will then react to small amounts of input, even in your 10-gallon. If you just keep the less is more approach by doing one top dress and having some organics alive on hand, I think you can do a full run of those 10 gallons without minimizing your yields or making it extra hard on yourself. Ideally, I would like to see larger containers, but ultimately, this is just about the size that you flip to flower. I feel like most people in a 4x4 with tall enough, they can kind of overshoot that 10-gallon, just make it a little bit harder on themselves. That's it.
And so now, like typically, I go from an aero cloner into a 2-gallon. So I always have that battery in that root expansion space. I veg for about 3 weeks to 4 weeks, and then I go right into the 10-gallon that then has a new battery. So how would my shift from the cloner to the flower room kind of transition?
So it's up to you. But what we're trying to do is achieve what they call low till or no till. And we're trying to not disturb the soil as much as possible. So that means a smaller transplant. And if it's a flower room, this is part of the challenge, is it creates a different workflow. And what I mean by that is if you're 24/7 on 12/12 in that room, you don't get any more veg time when you're in there. If that's the case, you do need to transplant a slightly larger plant, and that's your weakest link. So you have to focus on what your particular situation is. My situation is that I put them in that flower room and I can veg for 10 days and then turn to flower. And I like to transplant a clone that came out of the rooter into a beer-sized solo cup, you know what I mean? Just like that size, till it's nice and rooted, not root bound, but until it's got a good root set to hold the soil, right into my 10-gallon and flip the flower in less than 10 days. That potentially, if it's a slower vegger, maybe 20 days. But I'm not trying to go a very long time in veg. I'm trying to make up all that ground in the flower flip. And what I mean by that is the plant should double to triple in size with a lot of the genetics when you flip the flower. If you know it's a stretchier one, like season 4, quadrant 3, we had a Fruit by the Funk, what was a Chemd I-95 straw nano that like hit the ceiling. It tripled. I like that because you can have that short veg time. Now you're not wasting lights vegging all the time, so to speak. And when you flip the flower early, you get a root zone expansion similarly to the top line expansion. When you allow enough root space to do that, you get really healthy results. When you grow in the 2-gallon and you dig out a lot of the soil and you put it in the 10-gallon, if you veg for so long that it's already used a lot of its new root absorption in the 10-gallon, it's going to be slightly harder at launch. And what I mean by that is naturally in living soil, the fresh root tip that it's putting, like when it air prunes a root from the side and the bottom, and it sends a new root out, that root tip, not the fully developed circling roots, like the new ones, at the tip, it can pull the most nutrients the easiest into the plant. And so if you have room for fresh soil and fresh root explosion, when you have that vertical stretch in the flower, that's where you get ease of health in living soil. So try not to maximize the 10-gallon before you flip the flower, even if you still have to keep the 2. So you're saying that you veg for a little while after you put it in the 10-gallon?
Yeah, so my situation is I have a 10 by 11 veg room and I have a 10 by 11 flower room.
Yep.
And so from listening to you, it sounds like what I would almost want to do, because when I flip from veg to flower, I don't do a veg time in my flower room. I use microbes and, like I said, a little bit of a synthetic feeding in my Synganics to where as soon as I hit that, I don't get any transition shock or any kind of weirdness.
So the day they're transplanted, they're in flower now?
They flip within 24 hours.
Yeah, so the 2-gallon goes into the 10. That's now in the flower room, so they're about to go.
Yeah.
Okay. That model's good. I thought you were vegging for 4 or 5 weeks after you transplanted the 2-gallon into the 10-gallon.
No.
I think the only thing you could do to improve that is start with a 1-gallon so you have more root zone stretch. And you might not get quite as big of a plant, but I think you might get the same yield and better quality because it's going to be fully expressing itself instead of running out of steam towards the end. Alternatively, you could put it into a 30-gallon. And I know it sounds like a lot, but I'm impressed by the fact that you've already got 10 gallons set up. You've got a lot of soil there. And it sounds like you put in the work to establish that, even being an amputee. And so the 30 gallons, I truly don't know. I've had some disabled people say that was their best go is 20 to 30 gallons, but they had to know that they would have help if they ever needed to move it. Like, fuck, it's hard for me to do it. And I don't know whether you have a device or whether it's easy or hard. I'd imagine it's a lot harder when the soil gets a lot bigger. And so I would consider that and just decide, hey, the size of plant versus the size of container, as long as that's kept in place, it should fucking work. And 2-gallon and a 10, I mean, it sounds like you're damn close. I really think that you're not.
The thing that I'm really kind of wrap my head around is I have to come in the stairs, down the stairs, into the area I can't access through my garage. So I have to get 130 gallons of mixed soil down into my house. So for me, mixing a big tarp full of 130 gallons of soil is not really an option. So I'm at the point where I need a bagged or
Yep.
like a
Well, you can
bag
make it 10
solution.
gallons at a time. I mean, one bag a day kind of thing. And you could just literally make it to that size following just the same recipe and ratios, just like making cookies. And so I think it would be even better that way. It would just take longer period of time because you're not getting instant gratification. But to me, it's easier. And literally every single container would have exactly what it needs hand mixed in there. And it's a totally an option. So if that's something that you need, you can definitely reach out and I'll help you make that exact batch recipe.
Yeah.
But I get it, man. Like it's the holistic decision making theory is focused on the weakest link. If it's easier to manage it with 10 gallons than it is to carry that much soil, then fucking do it. And I think that's the better approach than forcing something that makes it harder on every other part. Right.
Yeah. So
And the organic live help, man.
my approach is I use like a King's mix that is amended with, and it also has cocoa and peat. And then
Cool.
I add my organics and my little bit of salts and my microbes. And that's what gives me the results I get. But like I said, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm buying bottles of Botanicare.
Yep.
And I want that part of the equation out.
Organics Alive. Stair step that direction. Organics Alive makes phenomenal products. And then as long as you're using like a craft blend or a soil that has lots of calcium in it, then those will pair really well together. Otherwise, add just a little bit of gypsum. And I think you'll do really, really well. I do like to say more soil and you don't have to worry about the feeding. You could also try an earth box, but I feel like that's changing everything. I'd rather just see you stair steps to Organics Alive, flip the flowers slightly sooner, or maybe try the 1 gallon. And you might have one that you're trying to get good at keeping the 1 gallons perfectly healthy before you transplant, where the 2 might be easier. But now you have a bigger battery on the day 1 of flower, so to speak. And
Yeah,
maybe not
that makes sense.
just do a row or something and really give yourself like the feeling that, hey, I'm not going to cut my yield in half. I don't think you will. I just think you're going to get better quality of result because it's going to use that soil to its full effect to stretch hard for you. And then you're not going to have to be almost like halfway through flower being back to hydro because it's exhausted the soil. And now you're going to have to make sure you nurse it to the finish line. I mean, that's the only difference, you know?
Well, Clackamas, I live in Oregon City, and I know Clackamas Coots around here somewhere.
Yeah,
so I'm just gonna have to. He's in my neighborhood somewhere, and so I'm just gonna have to track that dude down. I had an opportunity to go hang out with him, but my leg was not doing well that day, so I didn't get the chance. But yeah, I need to find that guy.
Just sprinkle some neem somewhere, and eventually he'll like find his way.
Him and the neem ninja.
Yeah. We are so stoked to have you here today, Jeremy. We really appreciate your time. A couple of things that I want to do before you go. Huge shout out to Jeremy. He shares so much knowledge. I love every time you're on a podcast or on a YouTube show. And then when you got your own channel, it was like the best thing ever because you're just like dropping all this knowledge. So make sure to check out the BuildASoil YouTube. Also, everyone watching this needs to know that they can call BuildASoil and they'll answer your questions. They have amazing support. You can call up. I've literally done this every year. I call up and I'll say I've got 30 gallons of soil and I've got a 25-pound bucket of craft blend. Like, what do I do again? And then they'll explain it to me. You know, you can do that whole thing and they're totally patient. They're not, they're just hugely helpful. So thank you, Jeremy, for building that company and building that sort of culture and knowledge for this community. It's hugely appreciated.
Oh man, thank you so much. I appreciate that. It means a lot. Like, we pay employees to be on the clock, around the clock. They're all growers and friends of mine. And even if they're not a grower and they just happen to answer the phone, they're going to go get the answer and make sure that like it's my answer and that you're able to, like, when I first started, you kind of went to that A and B because it came with that nice feed chart and at least you could rely on it when you didn't know what the fuck you're doing. And, then guys, you're hearing a mixed nutrient lines and they just start to know the whole deal and they know scientifically they get all into it. Like, we just try to make that easy. And if you get stuck somewhere, you overwatered or you just don't know what you didn't know, you can call in. You can email support at BuildASoil. Like, we're going to answer your question. We're going to help you make sure that you get to the finish line. I know when I first started, I just wanted to have herb in the jar and become a producer, not just a consumer.
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking for $500 a week if you're smoking a zip at a time, a top shelf back in the day. Like, it just starts to add up. And that's a shame. Like, everybody should have flavors, not have to worry about it costing money, and have it add something of intrinsic value to their life. that takes over and adds to other areas. And if the hydroponic store closes and you still know how to make some soil or grow it in your backyard, you're still going to be the guy to barter with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
No, there's so much truth to that. There is so much. And like we try to teach that self-reliance, and we want to encourage people that if you're in a state that's going legal, make sure you have your grower's rights. Because if you grow herb, you're probably going to share with a friend. You're probably going to help somebody in need, and the whole community as a whole is going to grow. And we're going to kind of take maybe a little bit of that corporate takeover out of the equation.
Yep. And know your rights. Like you said, like if you're driving, you got to know, like, hey, I'm not discussing my day with you. Like
Right.
the famous, and so just understanding some of these things have saved my life before. And it's important that when this is something like when you grow your own, it's loud. If you end up traveling or something, like just know what the fuck you're doing. You know what I mean? I know it's all legal and legit and everything, but you got to be able to take care of yourself so you don't get caught up. So.
Oh no, I really appreciate that. Yeah. All kinds of things, whether it's like for me it's know how if you can smoke a joint right before going into that corporate job, maybe smoke a vape instead or something like that. There's just part of there's so many different
Depends on where you work.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jeremy, give us the shout outs. Plug anything you want to plug. Yeah, make sure that people check out your stuff.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So buildasoil.com is the place to go. You can email support@buildasoil.com if you need something. YouTube is where I just teach from start to finish, back to back, over and over, the fundamental principles. And unlike a lot of other companies, we actually walk the walk. We show you how to grow. We're doing it live, so to speak, meaning the episodes are dropping real time. So if we fuck up, we teach you how to overcome that, and nobody's perfect. So if you want to learn from that, the YouTube's the place. Instagram's where we just drop random stuff. We're doing a tropical 10x10 with houseplants and fruits indoors and all sorts of fun stuff this season. Honestly, that's really where to check us out. BuildASoil.com, YouTube, Instagram. And then on top of that, the complete system, so to speak, is that we have put all the pieces together that were so desegmented in the beginning. And so if you're looking to grow in this style, we've got all the information for you at BuildASoil.com. And then we've got a support system that'll help you if you make a mistake. And pretty soon we're going to add an intake sheet where you can answer all the questions that you're dealing with so that we're actually more likely to get your help appropriately to you. And the more of us that learn this, we teach others, the more quality herb you'll have, which means if you ever are out, you can actually get some from a friend and you know it's going to be fire, and it just makes a better place. So that's how to get in touch with us. And that's how important it is that you do grow that top shelf.
That's awesome.
And one thing also is you have quite a group of folks in the BuildASoil family. Jay, the plant speaker, and Miles. Go ahead and give a shout out to some of those folks and let people know about some of the BuildASoil family.
Yep. So the OG is Kevin from Rootwise, and he really established one of the first relationships with me where I felt like I was looking up to somebody. And then our giving back, so to speak, came from us just that entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that hustle from being a home grower and recognizing that in others. AJ was working for me and ended up starting Growing Organic. And part of his way that he won the Colorado Home Growers Cup was using some ferments and kashi, things that a lot of the hash makers were making. He was super early on the scene in like fresh frozen rosin. And so that's Growing Organic. And then Miles, he's just been like Avinash Miles. I just remember like, dude, I heard that name. I didn't know you're around here. And then because he was buying some BuildASoil stuff and he was always into the natural way, I learned that he was making these huge fermentations on his farm and learning a lot of the KNF and Jadam styles. And so then we were just joking about like bottling it up because he had so much extra. And then people actually were getting onto that. So fermented plant extracts, Wheat Should Taste Goods are his brands. And we distribute them through BuildASoil. And having that like exclusive people and this authenticity has really helped BuildASoil establish a place in the market instead of selling the same catalog from Hawthorne or from whatever company like everyone else has. And then we've got Man Purse Medicinals, and we've got Yahweh, and they make like the Blue Oyster Straw Log, and another one makes a kefir that is then turned into a whey that is a biological like feed and biology product. And so there's a number of different products. We've got one of my favorites, Colorado Worm Company. They make a worm casting here in Western Colorado on their homestead farm with clean water and fully finished compost that they feed to the worms in apple crates in a barn. And then they bag it as a family and bring it down every week. Like The list goes on. And so if you scroll the front page of BuildASoil, you'll see a lot of those family brands that have been built over the last decade along with BuildASoil. And I think we're successful because of them, not for them. Like, it's been really this like reverse thing that's happened. And I just feel grateful to be somehow involved in all of it. Like,
Yeah.
fucking unbelievable.
Well,
Very
Jeremy, thank you so much for all of your contributions to the community. That's what you were just talking about, is this great community that you've built around yourself. And we are so thankful for everything that you've done for the community thus far, including hanging out with us on a Sunday afternoon for about an hour and a half. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for your time today. We'd love to have you back again someday, and we know you're super busy, so thank you so much. And as always, JR, we got a couple things that we need to say. First off, support your local grower.
That's
and then, of
right.
course,
growers love.
Growers love, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of your day.